The one thing that today's moderators have in common is that they are both candidates for President of the United States in 2008. And Nan Garrett from Georgia and Kat Swift, I'm sorry, you're from Texas. Okay, it's all yours.
Thanks, Scott. Another thing we have in common is we're both co-chairs of our state Green parties. I'm co-chair of the Georgia Green Party, Kat's co-chair of the Texas Green Party. One of the wonderful things that we all know and love about the Green Party is we have a respect for feminism, and we want to raise up the notion of feminism throughout society, not just within the Green Party. The National Women's Caucus was accredited as a voice to give vote to women's voices in the National Committee of the Green Party of the United States. We were accredited in November 2004. We're here to work to empower women within the party, to empower women throughout our nation, throughout the world. But one of our primary functions is to promote women candidates that are running for public office. So that's why we're here today. Yeah, thank you. We've got just a lot of fine women candidates here today. We're featuring 4 that are going to speak to you. We're introducing all of these ladies. We want you to feel free to ask them questions about their campaign. We want women Green candidates elected, not just running for office. We want them elected. So anything we can do in the media to promote these names, these voices, these campaigns, help us out here. Our first candidate for the day, I'd like to introduce Jill Bussier from Wisconsin. Jill is running for Wisconsin State Senate, District 1. Jill?
Hi. I'm a member of the Women's Caucus of the Green Party of the United States. Women have not yet attained equality in this country. We earn only 70% of men's wages for equal jobs, and we don't have equal representation in the legislature either. 2 out of 8 Wisconsin representatives to Congress are women. No U.S. senators are women from Wisconsin, although we do have a strong woman candidate, Ray Vogler, for U.S. Senate. She's running against Herb Kohl. 8 out of 33 state senators in Wisconsin are women, as are 26 out of 99 Wisconsin Assembly representatives. My husband and I were volunteers in the Brethren Disaster Service when we were first married, and we would coordinate work crews coming to clean up after a tornado or a flood or some other disaster. At one point, we were fixing a floor in a woman's house in West Virginia, and I was blunting a nail with the end of a hammer so that it wouldn't split the floorboard when I drove it in. One of the men we were working with looked at me and said, in all seriousness, "You're hitting the wrong end of the nail, honey." Sometimes I have similar experiences being a Green. People dismiss us as spoilers or idealists, as if we were too naive to be in politics. And yet it's our knowledge of history and social change and of the real conditions of the world around us that lead us to the policies that we hold. We have a deep understanding of what is needed to bring about a community of nonviolence, democracy, sustainability, and justice. Women are an integral part of that community. We in the Green Party, women and men, work to create a community that is supportive of all people. We call for the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, a living wage and pay equity for women, the right for women to have control over our own bodies as a fundamental requirement for equality and respect in our society and for the well-being of women and children. Women's unrestricted access to birth control, increased funding to address rape, domestic violence, and other violence to women, access to emergency contraception, measures that would end illegal trafficking in humans, because the large majority of illegal trafficking is for women and children. Educational opportunities for women, equal rights for lesbian and gay citizens, and universal single-payer health care. All these measures are instrumental to the world of peace and justice that we envision and work toward. The life and continuance of the community is sacred. Without respect for the balance that is necessary in our Earth communities, life will not continue. It is this element that makes us distinct as a party, the ability to consider and advocate for the well-being of women and the entire Earth community with a deep understanding of all that it entails. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Deanna Taylor. She's running for City Council District 5 in Salt Lake County, Utah.
It was we the people, not we the white male citizens, but we the whole people who formed the Union. And we formed it not to give the blessings of liberty, but to secure them, not to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men. And it is a downright mockery to talk to women of their enjoyment of the blessings of liberty while they are denied the use of the only means of securing them provided by this democratic Republican government, the ballot. Good afternoon. Those were the words of Susan B. Anthony in 1872 upon being convicted of voting in the presidential election. While women have come a long way, they still have a long way to go. Green women are here today in a display of unity in a political system that needs serious overhaul. My name is Deanna L. Taylor, and I'm a candidate for Salt Lake County Council in Utah District 5. I am a member of the Desert Greens Green Party in Utah, and my website is deannataylor.org. I decided to run for office because I saw that there was a gender imbalance in the county council. I have been a single mother, and I've had to depend on the government for basic needs at times in my life. I and my children have experienced periods of poverty, no health insurance, and have been victims of discrimination due to our economic conditions. Women do the work of giving birth to, feeding, and caring for the whole world. Yet women and their children suffer the most from the effects of war and poverty situations. Women and children comprise 80% of the refugees in the world and are impacted most by globalization, often having no or too little pay and too much work expected for that compensation. Women make only 75.5 cents for every dollar that men earn, according to the U.S. Census Bureau from 2002-2003. And according to the Institute for Women's Policy Research, the poverty rate for female-headed households increased to 28% in 2003, and poverty among adult women rose to 12.4%. Over 17 million women have no health insurance. According to UN statistics for 2005, more than half the U.S. population was women. Obviously, women should be represented in elective office in proportion to their numbers in the population on the local, state, and national levels, creating gender balance in politics. According to Karen Strickler, writer and political activist, without the achievement of gender balance in politics, women will be forever in the status of petitioner, not decision maker. The U.S. system is failing American women. Not only that, because of the hundreds of billions of dollars the U.S. spends on the arms industry, women in countries worldwide are starving, dying, being persecuted, and imprisoned. Women do 2/3 of the world's work and are the hardest workers. When we stop, the world stops. As an elected official in my state, I plan to educate my constituency on these values and issues and to work towards getting more women involved in issues that affect them. I plan to engage more women to work towards being empowered to voice their opinions more openly. I am seeking office as a Green Party candidate because I believe in the key values of social justice and equal opportunity, feminism and gender equity, and respect for diversity. I run in solidarity with my sister Greens in a united effort to promote a more balanced, honest, and gender-balanced political system. Thank you.
And keep in mind that those words from Susan B. Anthony, we read about things like this. If you're like me, most of you, did you ever think we'd get to the 21st century and we wouldn't even have an equal rights amendment? I mean, seriously, did you think we'd be in the 21st century without equal rights? But that's where we are. Our next speaker is Laura Wells, coming from California. She is running for the position of controller. Please welcome Laura Wells.
Well, I'm going to tell you a little story. It was 1992, and my daughter was 8 years old. We were in the car, and the radio was on. It was the presidential election time, the Clinton, Bush the first, and Perot presidential election. And suddenly, Natalia just sat straight up, looked at me, and said, "Mom, how come all the presidents are boys?" I said, "Natalia, that's a very good question." And I wanted to speak to her in a way that would give her hope for the future, that she wasn't going to be constantly kept back, as I told her about a tradition of thinking that boys were the ones that needed to be in positions of power. but I also wanted to let her know what was happening then. Now, this is 14 years later. She's now 22, and I have a feeling that she'd be looking around at a number of things, panels and radio shows and movies and candidates and presidents and legislatures, and say, Mom, why are they all boys? And so we have a lot of work to do. The men are wonderful, and they make great leaders. And women are wonderful, and they make great leaders. We have an imbalance. I've heard that if you have 30% of the legislature, as often happens in Scandinavian countries, that makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference in childcare, sending our next generation to schools rather than prisons, and making sure that the families are well cared for with real family values. The hope that I have this year, and that some of you may know I ran for controller in 2002, and I'm running again now, so I can see some difference in people that I talk to, is there's a readiness out there, I think, to change the system. And that's what we need to do. We need to change the system so that it isn't just the wonderful, rich, white men that are running things, but it's also people of color and women who are in their indecision making and input making positions. So what I'm going to encourage us all to do is to work to change this system with campaign finance reform, with instant runoff voting, with proportional representation. Move all of those things, because that's what it's really going to take to open up the doors, so that at some point my daughter in the future won't have to say, why are they all boys?
Thank you, Laura. And next we have Julia Willebrand, seeking the position of comptroller for the state of New York. Julia?
You know, it's absolutely wonderful to be here. I can't tell you how good it feels to follow three sisters, all of whom are running for office. One of them for the same office that I'm running for, 3,000 miles away. It's really fantastic. And I have to say, before I say something about myself and what I'm going to do, I must say that our incumbents in California and in New York, comptroller and comptroller, between them arranged a cozy little deal whereby California put up 50 million and New York State put up 200 million. The comptrollers control the retirement funds in both states. In New York State, it's 140 billion. That's 10 zeros. And in California, it's more. They control that, and they decide where it's invested. And those two guys decided to invest $250 million in creating a new hedge fund. Didn't exist, didn't have a track record. They put the money up. So the people we were running against put $250 million in a hedge fund to fund construction of roads, among other things, in Israel. So here we are in 2006 with no housing, with no health care, with no this, that, the other thing. But those two controllers could think of nothing better to do than spend our money on roads in another country. So a little bit about me. You know, everyone thinks of the controller job as that's the head bookkeeper, and that's a man's job, right? Well, first of all, I know a lot about numbers because I have a doctor's degree and my specialization is test and measurement. So numbers are my thing. The other thing that I really know a lot about numbers comes from the fact that I'm the next oldest of 10 children, a very poor New York family, and one of my jobs growing up was shopping. I had to buy the food for the whole family because that was a job I had, plus take all the younger brothers and sisters out to get their shoes and their clothes and this and that. So I know it from two ends. And the comptroller position has so much effect, or can have, on women. That comptroller invests $140 billion in New York State. It could be invested ethically. There is such a thing as socially responsible investing. In fact, Norway has just disinvested from Walmart, for one thing, because they are not socially responsible, believe it or not. They have North Sea oil money to invest. We could be doing that in New York if the comptroller if I was the controller, that would be the first thing. I would institute socially responsible investing, and I would look to, for instance, Walmart. How's the childcare situation in Walmart? Are their employees getting childcare? Are their employees getting home leave when they need it? We can do it. It's reasonable under state constitutions to look at this sort of thing, so we can do it. Another thing, the state of New York, at least, the comptroller signs off on all the contracts. In the state of New York, 97,000, mostly young men, are in prison, in upstate prisons, for drug-related offenses. They have mothers, they have wives, they have sisters downstate. Their contact with them is by telephone. But the state of New York has a contract with MCI, and the only way that they can contact their families is to make collect calls on MCI. MCI has a 600% surcharge on the cost of collect calls from the prisons downstate. When we think about the 97,000 families, mostly women, of those prisoners who are suffering because they cannot, in general, talk to their loved ones because they have been corruptly put in prison for phony drug charges, but even that. So the controller could, if the controller were a woman and could think compassionately about this kind of thing, make a change in that issue. The major problem in New York State, one of the major ones, is housing. Housing is a disaster. No one can afford basically to live in New York City anymore, and the controller could be investing that $140 billion, part of it, in housing, affordable housing. We don't do it. We invest it. He does invest money in stadiums. We build stadiums all over the place. We give corporations yet another handout. Most of them probably couldn't exist if they actually had to exist in a free market, but they don't exist in a free market. They exist in a nanny state where the state takes care of them and lets women, children, everybody else sink or swim on their own. So I'm really, really so happy to be here today with all my sisters and brothers. Thank you.
Thank you. And Julia, I want to tell another note. Julia and I had a personal conversation about the problem of what they're doing there in New York. It's not uncommon. They're doing this in other states where they have this humongous markup on the long distance and collect calls from all the prisons. Now, you got to put that on top of the fact that you got the private prison profits that's already astronomical through the roof. It's actually a form of corrupt corporate socialism. We know what it is. I mean, we do. But she was telling me this, and I was sitting there thinking about all these families who can't afford to contact their loved ones. And all I could hear was Cole Porter's song, Love for Sale. Just playing. Our governments have put love up for sale. Highest bidder. We have a lot of other fine women candidates here, and I want to introduce them to Kathy Dopp. Kathy is running for, it's okay. Kathy Dobbs running for Summit County Clerk in Utah. And we've got Ann Wilcox, who's running for District of Columbia City Council at-large seat. We've got Katie Culver here. Katie is running for Tennessee United States House of Representatives seat District 7. We've got Cynthia Morrison Gale here from Alamogordo, New Mexico, running for House of Representatives seat 57. In addition, we know we've got some other candidates. For example, Ray Vogler's running in Wisconsin for United States Senate. She is our first U.S. Senate Green woman candidate, our only one this year, woman candidate running for United States Senate. She's busy campaigning and can't be with us this weekend. We've got Tracy Confer that was here earlier today, who's running for Pennsylvania State Assembly, District 174, and she's busy working with the green business on the floor over on the National Committee. This year we've got approximately 66 women candidates out of a little over 300 green candidates across the nation. This is great numbers, but it's still not quite 25%. So what a great group of women green candidates we have here. Kat.
At this point, we will take questions from media if anyone has any.
I heard two people use the same statistic of 73 or 74 cents on a man's dollar. But my understanding of that situation is that white women make 73 to 74 cents on a white man's dollar. Now, do these people, are they, the people that use these numbers, I understand that black women make 60 cents on a white man's dollar, and Hispanic women make 54 cents on a white man's dollar. Now, are these people, or are these facts not accurate?
I'm sure that your facts are accurate, but I had actually wanted to, I'm so glad you brought it up, because when I heard 70 cents on the dollar set from two of our candidates, I really wanted to make it clear that it isn't just, first of all, women are actually not advancing. What actually happened is in the last 30 years, the average income of anybody below the median, you know, the bottom 40% quintiles, that have lost about 20% of their income. So what in fact happened was women's income compared to men's, it used to be, when I first got really involved with politics, now had a button that said 59 cents. It didn't say anything else, it just said 59 cents, and everybody would say to you, what does that mean? And if you were in now, then you'd say, that means women make 59 cents to every man's $1. So now it's ostensibly gone. Well, I mean, that's a statistical artifact, but just across incomes, right? Now that you see women make 70 cents to every women of any color make 70 cents compared to men of any color's dollar. It's only because men of any color's dollar, if they're working men, their income has declined in the last 30 years. That's what happened to make that change. Women haven't made, whatever color, haven't made a nickel in improvement. But yes, you are right about the fact that people of color are adversely impacted by everything. You know, the numbers on black men's unemployment, which of course is what has to do with your income. If you're not employed, your income is very low compared to whites. Or I saw one that was really shocking. Young black teenagers, male teenagers, are 6 times more likely to be unemployed than white male teenagers. Yeah, you're right. You know, it's a horrendous issue.
Could I speak to that briefly? Absolutely. Thank you. Just coming from the District of Columbia, I just wanted to raise a related economic issue that disproportionately affects women and families, and that's the lack of affordable housing and communities which are diverse and which are not purely market-driven. And we're really facing that in D.C. It's becoming very gentrified. The last census showed that the city is becoming much less, you know, it was largely African-American before. There are more white upper-income residents moving in, and neighborhoods such as Columbia Heights, where I live, is becoming a sea of condominiums up and down the streets, and it's pushing out Hispanic marketplaces and other businesses which cater to the very diverse community that used to live there. And we have a lack of, youth clubs are being driven out, community centers, libraries are being closed. So it's really an issue which disproportionately affects the families, including families with single parents and children that used to live there. And so that's a major issue that DC Statehood Greens are working on, in addition to, of course, the underlying issue of statehood and full political equality. So, thank you.
Becky?
I'd actually like to follow up asking Anne or maybe somebody else also. You talk about being, we are majority people of color in DC, and the numbers are changing. And so one of the questions I have to ask is, you're a white woman, and I'm seeing all white candidates here, and what does this do in terms of in a city like DC, where probably to a large extent, I think it's a predominantly white slate that's being proposed for the fall.
I can comment on that briefly as well. Yes, fortunately, we have been able to recruit 2 very good persons of color, a woman named Joyce Robinson Paul, who's running for the shadow senator, which is would lobby for statehood in the Senate. We have these sort of shadow lobby positions, and also a man named Keith Ware, who's a small business owner, also African-American, is running for our shadow representative, and he would lobby the Congress. So we're doing very well in that regard. We have some neighborhood commissioners that are people of color, but
But you're right, Becky. The district is changing a little bit. It was interesting because our 13-member city council has been majority white. There were 7 white members and 6 members that were not white. So that's been a sort of a sea change for a city like Washington, and I think that'll probably adjust a bit. And we also need more Hispanic office holders because there's a large Latino population. So. In fact, the area that I live in is sort of northwest DC, and a candidate like myself probably could get elected. But I think citywide we do need to continue looking for diverse candidacies, and our statehood Green Party needs to recruit good, solid candidates who are people of color, like Joyce and Keith, the 2 that I mentioned at the very beginning. So clearly, in an urban area, you have to be mindful of what the real voting demographics are going to be.
Are there other responses to this particular question before we take another question? Because
I'd be curious if there's somebody who can comment on the sort of the. I realize obviously this is just like 10% of the candidates that are running nationally, but I don't know what the demographics are.
Well, Kat and I have talked about this before. I can't answer your specific statistical questions, but what I would want to say is most of the people in this room understands that the people who are most affected by the policies that we're trying to change are often women and children, poor people, people of color. But these are usually the people who have the least amount of time to actually get out and run for office because they're busy just trying to keep a roof over their head. They're just busy just trying to feed their kids, And so the reality is a lot of times that the numbers may be low, even in Green Party candidates, of people of color, of the poor people, because they're just trying to make a living and just keep a roof over their head. But I can't give you the specific. Yes.
I just wanted to say a couple of little things, and one of the things that we're very pleased about in Oakland, California, is that Amy Allison, an African-American woman, is running for city council in the district. And there were I think it was a 5-person race, and she's in a runoff with the incumbent. And so Amy Allison, Matt Gonzalez, as people probably know, was the supervisor of San Francisco. Peter Cameo has run for governor. Donna Warren has run for lieutenant governor. And there are a number of other people, and we have Cliff here in the room running for governor of Connecticut. And the thing that I'm proud about with the Green Party is that I have seen a lot of people encourage people of color to run, and sometimes I've seen encouragement of women running. Sometimes I've seen where it needs to be a little bit better, but there are some examples, and I'm real happy about the ones in San Francisco Bay Area.
I would like to just add one more, because it's such an important issue for us in terms, we the Greens, in terms of diversity, and it's really, really difficult. But I was speaking to a woman the night before last, Elizabeth Jean-Pierre. Elizabeth Jean-Pierre is a woman from a Puerto Rican woman from a very poor background. She's a lawyer, and she runs something called Uprose. And we were talking about the fact that her son, who was with her, is in a very fancy private school. And I guess I raised my eyebrows, I didn't mean to. And she looked at me and she said, I do all the work I do, and she works in a really difficult circumstances, does wonderful work in Sunset Park in Brooklyn. She said, if I didn't have him in that private school, I would have to be an activist, a full-time activist, almost full-time activist in his school. That's the facts of the matter in New York City public schools. If you want to get your kids appropriately through a public school in New York City, you better plan on spending 20, 30 hours a week doing activist work in that school. She said, so I made a decision. I would work for my community, and he got a good scholarship to go to a fancy private school. So, that's a reality for people of color. The ones that would normally be our candidates are busy doing something else. So it isn't that we don't want them or that they don't even want to be here, but it's choices have to be made. And for me, that was a really revealing thing. And she just the night before last, actually, before I came here, we were on an activist event together. So I just wanted you to hear that story.
I think too.
Can I just add one thing? Scott wanted me to mention that we. Sorry, just a minute. I apologize, sir. He wanted me to mention that we did have a mayoral candidate and another city council candidate, persons of color, who had stepped forward on our ballot line. So thank you very much. Chris Crowder was the young man's name, and a woman named Carolyn Steptoe. So we do have a rather diverse slate. Thank you.
This is the women's caucus.
That's right.
Sorry.
Well,
Good. Go ahead.
see now, what I wanted to say was that there was a history of persecution within the black and brown communities. So you should not expect them to come forward with all the issues that you mentioned. This affects the psyche, both objectively and subjectively. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. Ms. Comptroller of New York, you talk about housing shortages and how it's so high priced. Is it feasible that you could put forth or suggest a policy of rent control?
We, as the Greens, have a position in terms of trying to change something. It's called the Erstat law. There was rent control in New York City. In fact, I happen to be the recipient of rent control. I'm going to live in a rent control department, and the fact that I'm in a rent control department makes it possible for me to do what I do here. So I have a very big vested interest in hoping that stays in place. New York City has some sort of a modified version of rent control, and it is under attack every single day of the week. And one of the reasons why is that the state controls it. You know what? Janet lives in Cambridge that used to have rent control till the state put up a phony referendum and wiped it out. So we do have rent control to some degree, but it's been eaten away bit by bit by bit. As a controller, that's a legislative issue. I like to talk about the things that the controller can do. The controller can say no to that MCI contract because the controller signs it. The controller can say no to investing in unethical corporations because the controller makes that decision. So as a controller, I can have a bully pulpit and I can say we should have rent control and we should actually repeal the Erstat Act. The Erstat Act took home rule away from New York City. A city of 8.5 million people doesn't have control of most of its life, if you will, because the state took home rule away from it. So we don't have the right to establish a rent control law. It would happen tomorrow if we had that right, because people are being priced out, shoved out, doubled up. They have to move constantly into neighborhoods further and further away from where they work. Sure, but it's the controller doesn't have, the legislature, the people we have running for governor, for the state legislature, they can propose that. I like to talk about the things that I could do if I were actually elected, as opposed to saying, in some wonderful world, I would do A. I would legalize drugs tomorrow if I could, you know, but I don't have that power.
Becky? Pat and Ann, I'm wondering if you each tell us briefly why you're seeking the nomination for president.
You go first. I've actually always wanted to run for president since I was a small child, and partially I'm doing it now because I feel like it's about time that I put this off long enough. I grew up in one of the other political parties, and I've been with the Green Party now 10 years. In the 2004 campaign, one of the things that I had been pushing for was for the Green Party to have a woman candidate at the top of our ticket. We didn't really have candidates that stepped forward. I decided that one of the ways to make that happen was to put my own name out there. I've told people repeatedly, if you want some other higher profile name, if you want some other woman candidate, if you want some other candidate, if you don't want me, you better be out there recruiting people now, because I'm going to run. And I may or may not get the nomination, but I'm going to run because it's something that I feel empowered to do. I feel like the Green Party is here to lift up the world for not just women, but for people that have been oppressed and held down for eons. And we can do that. We have the platform, we have the idealism, we're not sellouts, We're not beholden to corporations. We support publicly financed campaigns. We support legalized drugs. Cliff, do you remember how we first met?
Yeah, at one of the normal conferences.
Well, one of the things I asked you at the time, which is relevant to the conversation we've had now, was how do we get more people of color involved in politics? Do you remember what you told me?
I told you that the only way that they are going to come is that we continually go to their areas and support their causes. That's the only way. But see, and I also told you, drug policy reform movement was not ready for a strong infusion of blacks, because with that, it's going to come all of those other issues that blacks and Latinos face, and they're not ready for that. The Green Party is not quite ready for it either.
And you told me one more thing. You said we got to make it real and we got to make it exciting. We got to bring it home to what affects real Americans, whether it's their pocketbook, whether it's their education system, whether it's clean air, clean water, their home, a roof over their head, peace, their sons and daughters in the war dying. You got to make it real for people. And that's what I'm going to do.
Can I just say ditto? No. Well, I haven't wanted to do this since I was a kid, but when I was staying in Canada back in the mid-90s, my friends and I used to have conversations about politics in Canada versus the United States, and they kind of planted the idea in my head back then, and I won't be old enough until 2008 to run. So the general idea was, okay, I'll be 35 in 2008, I can run for president then. And so that's why now. And I also, a big reason is that I'm 33 now, and I can't even recall having a president who did anything really useful for anything that I really cared about. So, and there haven't been any women, and last time in 2004, all the women who ran were supporting the man to be, they weren't running for themselves, they were running for a man. They were placeholders, and I found that quite offensive, and so that was another reason. And basically, whatever powers the president has are quite limited. I mean, you can veto things, you can't create laws, but you can kind of lobby, and so there's a limited power. But it's also that it's an executive position, and if you've ever worked in an office, the person who knows what's going on and who runs everything is the assistant or the secretary or the office manager or whatever title they want to give you these days. And that's what I've been doing for the last 15 years of my life. My whole entire working career has been in those positions, and I've done different industries, and I'm good at it, and I've kept several companies alive that should have failed. So I figure I'm qualified. Any other questions for the candidates? All right, well, candidates will be available throughout the weekend and after the conference, and so be sure to talk to them if you have more questions about their particular races. And keep an eye on these women, as they're going to change the face of politics and government itself. Thank you for coming and covering Greens in the media.